Hey folks, I'm Steve from Number 12 Cider, and this is my business partner Colin. Today we want to talk to you about ice cider and cryo-concentration. And just to kick us off here, we brought a little bit of our own ice cider-like product called Shackleton. Shackleton is an ice cider we made by cryo-concentrating apple juice. And then after we fermented that concentrated apple juice, we aged it for 1 year in a Calvados barrel. So it has a nice darker color. It's got beautiful aromas from the barrel and the kind of juice that we use, and it is higher in alcohol. It's 16% alcohol, this one is. And I think it's fantastic. Colin, what do you think of this product?
Cheers.
Cheers.
So yeah, it drinks a lot like a dessert wine. There's a lot of sugar left over in this process, but there's, as Steve mentioned, a lot of alcohol as well. So we're 16%, so it's boozy. It's a great sipper. It goes really well with food, like a cheese plate or something savory. It's a wonderful addition to your kind of range of what cider can be.
Maybe people don't know out there what ice cider is. So Colin, you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, ice cider is there's so many potential products that can come from an apple, right? Ice cider is just one more. It's different than hard cider, and that's a little bit boozier. You don't drink as much because it's higher alcohol, 16%. Usually it's about 7 to 13 generally. Ours is a little higher in this case. But it's dessert wine, so it's much sweeter, and it just fills another box of what cider can be, basically. But you're intensifying the sugars, you're intensifying the taste, you're intensifying the color, the acid, the tannins, whatever's in that apple. You're going to remove the water for the most part and concentrate everything else, and then make this wonderful alcoholic beverage out of it.
Yeah, and how we do that is, as Colin mentioned, cryo-concentration, literally freezing apple juice and not thawing it entirely out. And if you're making a very concentrated product, like a traditional ice cider, you use a very small amount of that juice that thaws after you freeze it. And if you're just using cryo-concentration to increase the sugar level of your juice, you can use a lot more of that juice before discarding the ice. So an example of that, Colin and I did is a year ago or so. We used a pear juice that we found to be a little too low in sugar, and it tasted, although it had some good qualities, it tasted a little watery to us. And in that case, we froze the pear juice and we drained off about 65% of it, resulting in approximately double the sugar level we had previously had and a higher viscosity. So it fermented out to be a beautiful, slightly concentrated pear cider.
Yeah, and that's a great example. It doesn't have to be this. You can have this tool that we're going to talk about today with this cryo-concentration is a great method for things like that, or rescuing other ciders that you want to have a little more intensity to them. So it's a nice method for a lot of things, not just ice cider.
So why don't we proceed and demonstrate specifically how this is done?
Sure. So let's talk about the cryo-concentration method and how we're cryo meaning freezing, right? And we've taken, as of last night, we took this 5-gallon jug and filled it with some orchard pressed cider. Notice that we didn't fill it all the way because knowing it's going to freeze overnight, we want to leave some space in there for expansion. So we put about 4 gallons into this, and here we are in Minnesota, Minneapolis. We had an overnight temp of about minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday.
It was a little chilly.
A little chilly. Hence
Still wearing the hat.
Hence the vest here today. But it's cold. And the beautiful thing about that is, put this out last night, came in this morning, and it's a solid block of ice just overnight. So that's something you can do. Otherwise, a freezer works too, but that was an easy way for us to do it last night.
But it's important, as I go around here to pour some of this, it's important to have a solid block of ice to start with, right, Colin?
Yeah.
If you don't have a solid block of ice, you're not giving yourself the best opportunity to get a high concentration. And of course, if you're making something like we did with the pear cider, maybe that doesn't matter as much. But if you're trying to make something very concentrated, you've already handicapped yourself if you don't freeze it entirely. And then when you freeze it, if you're making something very concentrated, you should know that this thaws, the very concentrated part of that juice thaws very quickly. And if you're making a traditional ice cider, something that's used high concentration, you should thaw it in the cooler or the refrigerator. If you don't, it will thaw too fast. And maybe we'll see what we have today. Colin, how long ago did you take this out of the cold?
This has been sitting in room temp now for a couple hours. And like I said, we started with a solid block. I know there's juice in here. I can see it collecting in the sides. We don't know. We'll find out in a minute here.
Well, let's pour it out. Let's pour it out and measure the brix, or specific gravity, to see where we're at.
What we're doing in this process is, if this is all solid, the first thing that's going to melt is the sugars from that apple juice. So the stuff that'll stay behind is the ice crystals or the water, and so we'll leave that in the container and we'll pour out that concentrated juice. So it's a very simple kind of physics way to handle this process.
So we're going to pour this all out into this beaker. We'll see how much there is. If you look inside there, you can see this is indeed a big block of ice. And Colin's going to tip this thing all the way up, and we're going to get all of this juice that we had. Now this is from how many hours of thawing did you say, Colin?
This is a couple hours, probably 3 hours, I would say.
I think you're good. Pull it up.
Okay, and that's at room temp. Like Steve said, it's probably a little better to go a slower melt because that's a fair amount of juice in a couple hours.
So this is a good example of why it's really important to thaw in the cooler if you're going to make a high concentrated product like an ice cider. We already probably are below an ice cider brix level. As a point of reference, if you're making ice cider, that block, a typical block of apple juice ice, is going to be something like only about 1/5 of that is needed to make your ice cider.
Yeah, 1/4, 1/5. And we got a target, so what we're trying to do is leave the water here and collect all the highly concentrated juice here. Well, the question is, how do you know when you're done? You know, how much longer should we melt or not melt? You know, when are we going to stop? And the general guidelines for ice cider would tell you somewhere between 30 and 35 brix is kind of a nice general number that will ferment out into a beautiful ice cider. That will be something between maybe a 7 and 13% alcohol. So Steve's got a refractometer. It's a very easy way to measure sugar. Just put a drop on the plate and hold it up to the light, and you'll see the guide inside there will tell you the brix and sometimes the specific gravity as well. And
so we're at 22 brix.
We're at 22 brix, so we overshot it, it looks like.
And for those of you that use specific gravity, the specific gravity here is 1.092.
Okay.
1.092. So you can do the math, but that's going to result in a much higher alcohol product if you ferment it out.
Than hard cider.
Than hard cider.
Yes, right.
So what we would do with this is we would go ahead and follow our one of our other video instructions and pitch yeast on this product to create that high alcohol product.
And you mentioned it's not up to 30 brix. In other words, we took too much of the water with this when we poured it out just now, right? So
yeah.
we could theoretically freeze it again and do that again until we hit a target of 30 brix, right? If that's what we want to do.
Yeah, this was 30 brix, right?
It was a little higher actually. I think it was closer to
34,
35, something like that. But yeah, I mean, that's the fun part. We could ferment this out, and it might be a different product, a little bit less alcohol. It might be the most fantastic thing we've ever drank, right? It's possible. But if you have a target of, I want something that's 30 brix to start with, we might have to refreeze it, do this process again until we hit exactly where we want to be.
Yeah, and looking at this getting to 22 brix, there's two things that could have made it so that it wasn't 30 or more. One is it might not have frozen completely. It needs to be really solid frozen to get that high a brix. And two, we did not thaw it in the cooler, and that is a must if you're going to get a really high brix ice cider type product.
Right.
So, okay folks, to sum it up, cryo-concentrating is taking apple juice, freezing it, and extracting the more concentrated portions of that juice that thaw first. If you want to have something like a traditional ice cider, you need to be careful about how you're thawing it. It needs to be frozen solid like a block of ice, and you can thaw it in a refrigerator. And the first couple of days that you thaw that in the refrigerator, you'll get juice that is 30 plus brix. And you'll stop as soon as you're not having juice that is 30 plus brix. If you want to just use this to make something different, more concentrated, more viscous, or it has more alcohol, you can thaw it and get to the desired brix or specific gravity. In this case, we came up with a 22 brix, 1.092 specific gravity product. That's going to be a lot less sweet if the yeast ferments that out than a 30 plus brix product. Something to know about, but you can experiment with these things at home. And hopefully you make something as good as Calvados. Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy cider making.